Hello and welcome to the Reverend Hunter Podcast. This is Tony Jones. I'm the Reverend Hunter, joined as always by the Myrna Minkoff to my Ignatius J. Riley, Brandon.
How's it going, Tony? You made those easy to pronounceable names.
Brandon, we're going deep.
We really are.
We're starting to. We're going to go. This is a relatively obscure literary reference.
Wow.
To the book A Confederacy of Dunces, which is one of the funniest. I think I've read it 3 times.
That's
anyway.
Great.
If people are into comic novels, it's a classic, and quite a crazy story of the author was a young man who committed suicide actually, and his mother worked for years and years to get this book published, and when she finally did, it won the Pulitzer Prize.
Oh, wow. That's insane.
Yeah. It's really funny, man. I mean, it's a hilarious book, but
I'll have to read it based on the title alone.
I know. It's just a fantastic title. Yeah. So, dude, it's summer in February. How's that treating you?
It's absolutely wonderful. I can't believe how nice it was yesterday. 60 some odd degrees in February in Minnesota.
And it's going to be like 70 next Sunday or something.
See, I don't know how I can go back to a normal winter after this. I got to be honest.
Going to be tough.
It's going to be real tough.
Yeah, I just spent the weekend in Southwest Florida, around the Fort Myers area with some family members. And, you know, everybody down there who, like, all the snowbirds, they're all like, oh, it's been a really crappy winter. It's been cloudy and windy. And I'm like, yeah, you didn't even need to leave Minnesota because it's been super nice.
Did you check out any spring training action while you were there?
I didn't. You know, everybody in my family is like, baseball's so boring. So,
but baseball's your thing.
I know. So I'm not going to, I just didn't want to go alone. It was like this kind of family weekend.
Sure.
And I'm like, I don't want to leave for 6 hours to go watch the Twins. I mean, I did want to go, but I felt a little like I'd be taking one of the cars and then, you know, I'd be gone all day. And so I did not, sadly. No, we mainly just chilled. I read a book and we hung out. It was nice.
Oh, good. That sounds like a good time.
Yeah, and now I came home to boxes of my books in the garage. So I got to hold my new book for the first time when I got home from the airport last night, which was super fun. I got a copy for you, Brandon. I'll give it to you.
Wait.
I'll give it to you in Sioux Falls this coming weekend.
Wonderful.
When I see you. Yeah. And so I'll be at Pheasant Fest, and I know you will be too. And in Sioux Falls. And then the next weekend I'll be at Canoecopia in Madison, Wisconsin, and just starting to line up different speaking gigs. You can see them all on the reverendhunter.com. That's pretty exciting stuff. So yeah, it's just that it's that time when a book comes out when like the momentum is building and, you know, fingers crossed and prayers said and incense burned to the universe that people will enjoy the book.
What's the official release date that people
the official
can get
release date is thanks for asking, April 2nd. And for those of you in spitting distance of the Twin Cities, and Brandon, I'd love to see you there and hope some of the Ron Scher Productions and Talk North crew will come. April 2nd at Wooden Hill Brewery in Edina, Minnesota is the official book release party. And I'd love to see a lot of people there.
Yeah, I think I'm going to make it down for that for sure. It sounds
it'll
be a good time.
It'll be fun. Shug, the probably the most popular guest ever on the Reverend Hunter podcast, Shug Emery, will be there and give a little talk because he's read the book.
That's wonderful. That's really cool.
Yeah, so it should be fun. The guy, my guest today, John Dailey, has also written a book. It's coming out a little later than mine. I think it's coming out in August, but you can already pre-order it on all the bookie websites. Tough, Rugged Bastards is the name. He's a Marine who was in the Corps, had been maybe in the Corps for, 8 or 10 years when, his life changed, when all our lives changed on 9/11, but his life changed like on a dime because he was, within 24 hours, he was on a ship heading toward a combat zone, and then ended up in a unit of special forces that was brand new in the Marine Corps, and became one of the leaders in that unit. And then he has since written a book about it. He still trains Special Forces Marines, but really, just one of those interviews that I like to do, because here's somebody whose experience of life is so different than mine. I think he's a year younger than me. And when I was, heading off to bougie Ivy League schools, he was, fighting terrorists. So it's good, I think. I mean, one of the things I like to do is talk to people who have different perspectives on life and have different life experiences, and this is surely one of those. So yeah, I really like talking to him.
No, yeah, I thought it was a very interesting listen on my part too, just because, yeah, it was kind of cool to hear. I mean, cool as a weird word to use from it, but it was interesting to hear, just like you said, how fast things changed for him. And I read a decent amount, watched a decent amount on TV of all this stuff happening, because that's when war coverage and TV was really hitting its stride. And yeah, I just can't even imagine what he was going through at that time. I was 18 when all this stuff happened, so. Yeah.
And I will say, before we get to the interview, that just as a heads up, I'm not the kind of person or interviewer who shies away from any kind of topics. But John does talk quite openly about what it's like to kill human beings. We could talk a lot about killing animals on this podcast, but it's not that often we talk about killing other people in warfare. But he does. I mean, that's been his experience.
Yeah.
So he talks openly about it. And if that's something that, for any of you who are listeners, if that's just not something you're ready for today, then maybe pause this episode and come back to it on a day you feel a little better about that. But yeah.
Well, and it is one of those questions, though, that I think pops up in most people's brain when they are talking to somebody that has served and have seen active duty. I think it does naturally come across people's brains. I just don't think people actually ask it.
I think you're right.
Understandably.
Yeah. I mean, you don't want to ask somebody at a cocktail party, what was it like to kill your first human being?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But maybe here on this podcast, if you are curious about that, or at least how it affected this one guy, and he's pretty candid and honest about how it affected him. And I think it surprised him in the way it did affect him. So yeah, I hope people will find this episode intriguing. Thanks for listening. As always, if you're going to be at Pheasant Fest or Canoecopia, please track me down. Come listen to my talk. I'll have books for sale, but there's also lots of other venues to buy The God of Wild Places. And I'd love to have your support, not only in the podcast, but in the book. So thanks as always for listening. And here's my conversation with retired Marine and a tough, rugged bastard himself, John Dailey. Hey, John, you're a tough, rugged bastard from what I've heard.
That's a rumor.
Is that true? Or is that not just something you call yourself? That's actually a legit descriptor?
No, well, that was, as the title of the book, I was really meant to be inclusive of the organization that I had the great opportunity to be a part of, not as a personal descriptor.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, before we even get into that, you want to get your disclaimer out of the way?
Yes, I have been told that before appearing on any podcast, I have to say that my views are mine alone and do not reflect the Department of Defense, the United States Special Operations Command, or the Marine Corps Special Operations in any way.
All right.
And that's it.
We won't. We will abide by that and not hold any of your organizations accountable for anything you say. Well, we were brought together by a mutual friend who regularly encourages me to have guests on, a former Marine of yours, Worth Parker. So
yes.
I've yeah, I trust Worth implicitly, but I still, looked up what you were all about, even though Worth told me, and when he tells me to do something, I just do it because I think all of us,
I think we all do.
Well, us civilians,
it's generally good advice.
When a Marine tells you to do something and you've lived as soft of a life as I've lived, then I pretty much do it. You know what I mean?
Right. Well, when Worth encourages you to do something, it's usually a good idea.
Yeah. So tell me, now, I mean, one of the things, I don't know, do you want to tackle religion first, or should we talk about your current life and your book and stuff like that first, and then circle back to your childhood religion?
Whichever you prefer to start with, I'm amenable.
Yeah, well, let's hear how you grew up a little bit and weave your religion into that, because that was one of the things that, Worth thought would be interesting for us to talk about is your current religious posture is quite a bit different than that in which you were raised.
Definitely. So, yeah, I grew up kind of a really idyllic, childhood in Virginia, very close to the Maryland, West Virginia border. So, right up in that area, tons of beautiful hills, a lot of hunting. Although my family, my immediate family didn't hunt a lot, but I had a lot of relatives and things that did. But we as a young child, we were Methodist, and by that, we went to Sunday school most weeks, and then we went to my grandmother's for a big Sunday dinner. But we weren't really what I would call religious until a fateful, I think, a Wednesday evening when I was in about third or fourth grade. My parents dropped us off with a relative, and kind of unbeknownst to me, made their way to an old-fashioned tent revival meeting, and then came back as kind of holy rolling evangelical,
radicalized in the tent. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And so that then quickly became like the centerpiece in our lives. That was that religion. We went to church, on Sundays, Sunday nights, once or twice during the week. And then at least once a year, the tents would come out and there was healings and that sort of thing. So it was quite a change, quite a change from the Methodist upbringing to this kind of hellfire and brimstone.
Right. You were young, but do you have any sense, looking back, on what led your parents to make that big kind of shift in the way they practiced Christianity?
It's funny. I've never asked them. I gathered that they, became aware of this or were invited, and I'm sure there was something that they felt was lacking. And when it kind of runs in the family. When we do something, we do it all the way. Right?
Yeah.
We jump in with both feet and we run.
Sure.
So they jumped in. Within a year or two, my father was a minister. Had his own church, and
oh my goodness,
I was like fully ensconced in the hellfire and brimstone evangelical religion.
And did you buy it as when you were a kid, or were you skeptical from day one?
I did. I would tell you, I was scared. I mean, it's really, really scary. Which is something that obviously my parents didn't consider. They obviously felt that they were doing what was right and the best thing for us. But when you go from, kind of learning Bible stories to, hell and damnation on a daily basis, it's a scary thing. And I think my brother and sister were younger. And so, my brother was, 2 years younger. So he was maybe in first grade, when this happened, and my sister was younger than that. So they really didn't know much else. But for me, it was a lot of terror, right? And just a constant, being torn between the fact that I'd kind of experienced the other life. There were a lot of rules and regulations that came with this, evangelical kind of Pentecostal religion. So a lot of things that I had become accustomed to doing, we couldn't do. My baseball league played on Wednesday night, so I couldn't make those games because church was more important.
Wow.
So there was a lot that, for me, that changed. So there was, some resentment, on the one hand, but there was some kind of terror on the other hand that I was going to, wind up in a pit of never-ending fire. So,
are your parents still holy rollers?
They're, I think, a little less rolling happens now, but they, they still attend church regularly. They're not. My father's no longer a minister, but I think it's that that worked to later kind of drive a little bit of a wedge between us. I really kind of fear on my part that I wasn't living up to what they thought. So after I joined the Marine Corps, it really became easier to just kind of distance myself.
Okay. Did it stick with your siblings, that version of religion?
No, I think, some with my sister. And like I said, she grew up, she knew nothing else. She's still relatively devout. But you hear a lot about Catholic guilt. I think there's certainly another brand of guilt for the evangelicals, but for me, like I said, it came with some kind of remorse, some guilt, certainly, but it also really instilled in me. Later it kind of came to fruition. Like a real interest in religion, what other people believe. And so I'm fascinated by religion, world religion. But it's really just not for me.
Yeah. Well, I'm guessing in the military, you ran into people who, that's the true melting pot of America is the military. And you must have run into people who had all sorts of different religious upbringings.
Yes. Yeah. It runs the gamut from, I've in the same platoon, I've had, certainly Catholics, evangelicals, Jewish folks, Jehovah's Witness, and it's interesting to kind of see how those beliefs and ideas collide.
Yeah. I think you say somewhere on your website or in your writing or on your Substack or somewhere that as soon as you fled your home and into the Marine Corps at age 17?
Yes. As soon as I could.
And religion was part of that? The reason you wanted out?
It was a part of it. There were myriad reasons. I really wanted to see the world. When you grew up kind of where I did, most folks stuck around. There wasn't maybe you'd go to college, and I had neither the money nor the grades for that. So the quickest way out was the Marine Corps, and it was. I don't want to make that sound as though it was just the first thing smoking. Right, I had wanted to be a Marine for as long as I could remember. As soon as I learned about Marines, that had really resonated with me. And in a lot of ways, and I talk about this in the book, a lot of ways, the Marine Corps kind of becomes your religion.
Yeah.
I think more so than some of the other services, right? You we're a cult in a lot of ways, a good cult, but we're very cultish.
Yeah. Well, tell me about that. What's it like for a 17-year-old kid to join the Marine Corps? I imagine not everybody makes it. Some guys must wash out. You not only stuck with it, but got into some specialty forces stuff that I want to hear about. But what was that first immersion like?
Yeah, when it's boot camp. The Marine Corps has been doing it since 1775, so they've gotten it down, right? But for me, being east of the Mississippi, went to Parris Island, South Carolina. So you arrive at night, you're on a bus with a bunch of people that you don't know. You know, the bus drives over this long causeway through the swamps, and you realize that there's no way out.
Oh,
you
wow.
know, there's as you come in and the bus pulls up, there's bright lights. The next thing you know, there's drill instructors screaming at you to fall out of get out of the bus and stand on yellow footprints that are painted on. And really from that moment, it becomes just a complete indoctrination to, you change your language. Really, the bathroom becomes the head. You refer to yourself as this private and that private. And I talk about the idea of Odysseus's ship, right? That by the end of boot camp, you're kind of rebuilt. Every board is rebuilt so that you're never quite the same. You're never going to return to being, if you make it through boot camp, you're never going to go back to being the person that you were before. And that's, I think, a good thing. For me, it was.
How many guys don't make it through boot camp, or what percentage?
It's really not a terribly high percentage, I don't think. There's certainly a handful that either get hurt and they may, be given the opportunity to heal up and come back. There are, some that can't hack it for whatever reason, but I think it's about 90%. Of those that start make it, and I could be wrong about that, but they do a very good job of. Just like I said, it's going to start from scratch. It doesn't matter where you came from. And there in boot camp, it's one of the going to church. And I'd kind of vowed that I was done with church, but Sunday mornings, they're required to give you the opportunity to go to church service. And so you're either a Protestant or a Catholic. I think if you're, at least when I went, if you were anything other than that, they would, pull in a chaplain to talk with you. But for the most part, you were a Protestant or a Catholic, you got to go for like one uninterrupted hour of, where you could sleep in the pews if you wanted, but you weren't getting yelled at. So everybody went to church, regardless of their beliefs.
Yeah.
And even that though was, a kind of part of the indoctrination. I remember there was, a lot of the songs that we sang were, the hymns that they sang were, military themed hymns and talk about, God providing victory for the righteous. And so it was, that was certainly the one, hour of the week in boot camp that felt very unnatural to me.
Well, your experience, I take it just from reading the descriptions of the book and stuff, your experience in the Marine Corps changed dramatically, kind of from pre 9/11 to post 9/11. So I'd love to hear you talk about that, what that was like. For us, for me as a civilian, I obviously have very vivid memories of 9/11 and the emotions that went around it. But it must have been quite a bit different experience when you're in the military.
Yes, it was, and I think my experience was very atypical. I was in Darwin, Australia, with my platoon. At this point, I had kind of moved into special operations, and I'd been in the Marine Corps for nearly 14 years by this point. So I had certainly made it a life, and was in charge of a 30-man special operations unit training in Darwin, Australia. And that was the first night that we had been training that we had some time off. So we went, cleaned our weapons, put them away, put on civilian clothes, and went out to a pub. And I was with, most of the young Marines were off chasing Australian women. Myself and the 4 team leaders that I had were all, older married guys. So we found a pub, kind of tucked ourselves away and just set about drinking Australian beer. When about 10 o'clock at night, the soccer game that had been on television changed to the first tower, and the bartender, kind of cranked up the volume, yelled and said, "Hey, you guys, everybody needs to watch this." And shortly thereafter, the Marines and sailors that are on what's called shore patrol, they're kind of the roving guards, came running into the bar saying, "Hey, you got to get back to the boat, get back to the boat." And by the next morning, we were out to sea.
Oh, wow.
So that meant that we were kind of the closest to the crisis. So very shortly thereafter, we were in October, I was in Pakistan, and then November in Afghanistan.
And what was the scene like? What was the I guess the mental, emotional, spiritual state of you and your fellow Marines?
It's interesting. So about a week or two after we had been there, we found ourselves on the side of a highway outside of Kandahar, and we were waiting for basically bad guys coming out of Kandahar. And if we found any, then we were, our job was to destroy them. And I remember telling my guys, we were freezing cold. It's December. That I'm bad luck, obviously. For I had never, in the 14 years I'd been in the Marine Corps, I heard very few shots fired in anger. None of them at me. And though I had trained and kind of made it to somewhat of a within the Marine Corps, a pinnacle of what I had wanted to do. I had never been in a gunfight, and I didn't really see that happening that night. So we were joking about that when a big truck full of Taliban came across the road, and we engaged them. And that's really, I think, an interesting, point as it gets to me in hunting. I had, like I said, I'd hunted as a kid, some, not a lot, but, I really cherished the times that I spent with my uncle, who would take me out deer hunting. And the Marine Corps really didn't provide, the opportunity for that, at least for me. It's tough. It's very tough, even today, for service members that are on active duty to find the opportunity. It's challenging to store your weapons. There's just a lot of, and there are groups, BHA and some other groups that are kind of working to help with that. But, for me, I had not been hunting since I joined the Marine Corps. And, once you join the Marine Corps, there's a part of you that feels that, hey, now it's your job to kill people. And that was the first night, the first time I did that. And I had always, anything that I had killed prior to this, from, birds to squirrels to, anything, I had this incredible remorse about, not that I felt that I shouldn't have. I, absolutely understand and believe in the, kind of the circle of life. And, but it struck me that I did not have that same feeling or compunction, or regret or remorse or anything about, killing these people. And that's been something that I've, trying to, thinking about, getting back into hunting. It's something that's, I feel like there's something I've got to get over.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. That's amazing. I mean, do you remember thinking that at the time? Like, wondering what it would be like to kill a human being? And then,
I don't. I mean, we, and part of it goes back to that indoctrination at boot camp. You talk, I joined the Marine Corps in 1987. So there were certainly things that would be deemed, that don't happen anymore, or things that would be deemed politically incorrect nowadays that were, but a lot of the like running cadence songs we were saying and chants, I mean, it was just all about killing. I mean, we're the Marine Corps. That is what we do. Right. So I talk about it in the book some, that, I felt that it would mean more, right? I felt it would, they call, when your first firefight is called popping your cherry, right? It's kind of, there's a lot of correlation between sex and killing, in a lot of ways. And, I say in the book, kind of joking, I was equally nervous about both of the things. I had practiced both of them, with great vigor, for a number of years, but, I was certainly a little more let down by the killing. I thought it would mean more. I thought it would like take something from me. And then I just kind of questioned, is this thing, already taken from me in the years of like some level of humanity or whatnot. And I recognized it at the time. I didn't spend, 20 years gives you ample time to kind of go back and use, how these, how I was impacted, and it's, I didn't think about it. And then over the years that followed, I went, back to combat in Iraq, and, I've killed more people. And it really, when I retired and when I got to the, asked to, hey, why don't you come out hunting? I really had this block, that, I don't want to go back and hunt and have it not mean anything. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. This is an odd question, and I mean, you can answer it or not. In my book, I write about the difference for me emotionally of killing a deer from a tree stand at 50 yards, or wounding a deer, which I've done, and then having to go up and dispatch the deer at close range, and how difficult the latter is. That killing at a distance and killing close up is so different for me in hunting, and particularly with a larger animal like a deer. When I have to wring the neck of a pheasant or a duck, I don't think I don't love it, but I don't. It doesn't really grab my soul in any way. So, what my experience of war is through movies and books, but you get the sniper at 1,000 yards versus somebody who's, pulls a bayonet off the end of their rifle and has to attack somebody by hand. Do you want to, with as much or as little detail as you want, is that part of the experience of killing in war?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, and there's been a good bit written about that, the idea of psychic distance in killing, so for the guy flying the jet that drops bombs, he's, very far removed from the act, right? And generally speaking, the closer that you get, the more, personal it becomes. I would say the kind of caveat to that is that quite frequently, the closer it becomes, the more people are involved. So, you can't necessarily say with certainty, hey, I did that. There was like 3 or 4 of us that shot this person. So, did I kill him or did somebody else? The times that it was for me, because I was a sniper, and then, years later in Iraq, and I really, the one experience there where I shot, I in my head and in the book, I keep calling him a kid, and he wasn't a kid. He was an adult with a beard, but he was young. He was relatively young, and that was looking at someone through a scope is much more intimate. And it's interesting, off topic totally, but while people with pilots, like I said, generally are so far removed that they're least impacted. What they've found more recently is that drone pilots, because quite frequently they'll, observe a bad guy for long periods of time, so they kind of become connected. And even though they're flying from, somewhere back in the States, thousands of miles away, flying a remotely piloted vehicle, when that vehicle drops a bomb, they have, a greater percentage of post-traumatic issues.
Yeah. Did you have fellow Marines who struggled more with the killing part when you were over there?
I did. And I really think it's, one of the guarantees is that nothing's guaranteed, right? On the way that, combat impacts, people or, people on different days. I've worked with people that have been, kind of like ice cold, that, one particular instance, affects them very heavily. Quite often, we'll find that there's whatever the threshold is for each individual, in regarding moral injury, right? If I hit a point where I've done something that crosses that threshold, it may not bother me now, but you can bet that at some point it will, right? At some point it's going to come back, like all of your sins come back.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, it's been my belief, and it seems to be relatively borne out, that the area that I worked in, the special operations, were a little bit less impacted by that. And I think that's has to do with the fact that we understood, more of the mission. I think we generally bought into the mission. We were given greater access to information, to make decisions, greater access to, the planning and the decision-making process. Generally speaking, we're a little bit older. So, I think that, often we're less impacted, but we're seeing now, we're, still seeing guys and gals, and part of it's just sheer duration. You can't send, young men and women over and over and over again over a period of 20 years, without there being some, repercussions.
Yeah. Yeah. This is something I've thought a lot about this. I've talked about this with Worth. There's another podcast I'm on regularly where we discuss issues of masculinity and the quote unquote crisis of masculinity in the modern West. I think all Western culture, not just the United States. But it seems to me that I'm reading a history right now of the city of Ravenna, which is on the east coast of Italy, because I'm leading a tour over there and just refreshing my memory. And well, as you might guess, I mean, the history of an Italian city between the years 300 and 1300, it's pretty much constant battle. It's war.
Yes.
Everyone's killing everyone. There's I'll give a shout out to your Substacks, which I've been reading, and my Substack post coming out tomorrow is about a guy who, the Archbishop of Ravenna, he wanted the kind of the blessing of the Archbishop of Ravenna so he could be the kind of military leader of that town. And the Archbishop said, you need to go to Rome and talk to the Pope. He's the one who grants that authority. So this guy left Ravenna, started heading toward Rome, and soldiers of the Archbishop caught up with him, killed him, chopped his head off, put it in a bag, and mailed it to Constantinople to let the emperor know this guy was not their choice for being the military commander of Eastern Italy at the time. And I mean, this is just yet another story from like the year 631 that barely anybody knows. For the people at the time, it was like probably the most momentous event of the year that this guy was assassinated and beheaded. But we don't even remember this guy's name, And
right.
It just seems to me that military battles and war have been part of shaping who men are for as long as we can remember, and suddenly they're not so much. I mean, they are for you, but they're not for me. They're not for my two boys aged 23 and 19. It's a minority of men who see battle now, not a majority. So I wonder, do you ever think about that in the historical perspective of what that means for or have you thought about it in the writing of the book, what it means for American manhood?
I have, and I think, and now it's. I mean, you can't just say manhood, right? Because I mean, certainly, but there's women, giving their lives in combat as well. But yeah, I think and then you take that a step further. That the percentage, it's like less than something like 0.02% of people will be in the Marine Corps. And there's like 2% of graduating high schoolers that are qualified to serve in the military, allegedly, right? And couple that with the fact that you don't have to hunt for your food anymore. You don't have to. We've become so far removed and insulated from anything unpleasant, right? That I think that's part of the that's that bears the culpability. But certainly, combat, the idea that we spent 20 years, which is pretty long. I mean, I would be, in most places, if you look in history, they fought for a season, then they would, stop, and they would, even in Afghanistan, really the big like fighting season. But for 20 years, that really doubles the length of the time that we were in Vietnam. It's, many times longer than the world wars, right? So that, for the people that bore the brunt of that, like I said, I was in 14 years before that started. And so I was only in for 8 years of the conflict, but the American men and women that joined after, that happened, when they knew, with certainty that they were going to combat. And then, a lot of them are, retiring now, reaching 20 years of service. And it's pretty amazing. And it never, it ceases to remind me that, we have, for all of the talk of, the old, new generations not matching up or living up, they've done pretty good over the last, and there's certainly negative impacts. And I do think, kind of more to your point, that there's been there needs to be a resurgence of masculinity. And I think that's become a bad word. And it's only become a bad word, I think, because we misinterpret it or define it.
Yeah.
In a lot of venues.
Yeah, I agree too, and it's a touchy subject. You if you even say the word masculinity, or that there's a crisis of masculinity, you have the possibility of offending people, because of course men, we've got a lot of problem with male violence in our society too.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know what the answer is. I don't know. There was a time when one of my sons was really thinking about the military, and I definitely encouraged him to go that route, but it's just completely unknown in my family. Like, I go back on both sides of my family, and I know I had like one uncle who was in the Korean War, and other than that, I can go back 100 years and don't see anybody who
wow.
Well, yeah. So I mean, it's also a cultural thing. It's part of some people's families, and not part of others. So,
yeah.
No,
I was gonna. My son, when he was in high school, came to me, and it really had been that we never wanted to push him into it. I kind of felt that over 20 years I'd kind of done our part for a while.
Yes.
But he came to me and he was really jazzed. He wanted to do it, wanted to follow my footsteps, and which makes you very, very proud. On the one hand, on the other hand, I'd put his mother through a lot, over not only her taking care of the family while I was gone, but nights of worry and things like that. So while I didn't discourage him, I didn't encourage him, and ultimately, he decided to do something else, and that didn't hurt my feelings at all.
Yeah. Interesting. Tell me a little bit now. I want to get into the book, because your book is really about the development of a whole new arm of special forces in the Marines, right? So you want to tell me
Right.
how that came about and how you were chosen as one of the, I mean, it's interesting just reading like the synopsis of the book. It's almost like out of a movie, like it seemed to me only in movies where they're like, go out, pick your guys, you get to pick your own team. But sounds like that really actually happened to you.
Yes, it was, I mean, kind of the things that the Marines lay awake, dreaming about. So a very, truncated synopsis of special operations history. When the Iran-Contra or the Iran hostage situation occurred, the attempt to rescue them was kind of a debacle from a military standpoint. And because of that, the U.S. military decided that it needed a special operations command, like an overarching structure under which the different special operation entities operated. And so the Navy SEALs, rather than working directly for the Navy, they went underneath the Special Operations Command. The Army Special Forces, the Green Berets, as most people know them, the Army Rangers. And when that happened in 1987, the Marine Corps opted out. They said, hey, we want to keep our special operations guys close hold. And that was the way that things evolved until 2001. And when 9/11 happened, the Secretary of Defense was Donald Rumsfeld. He recognized that there was going to be a greater need for special operations forces in the global war on terror. So he demanded that all of the Navy SEALs create more SEALs, the Army create more Green Berets, and told the Marine Corps that, hey, you guys this time are going to participate. And the Marine Corps still pushed back, but the final decision was that we would create a test bed unit, and it would be less than 100 men. The actual kind of assault force, about 30 of us, and then we had a large intelligence section and whatnot. But I had the phenomenal privilege of being selected as one of 4 team leaders for that unit, and where our job was to basically go to Iraq and prove that the Marines were capable of operating at that level. All right.
You were how old at the time?
I would have been 33, 34.
Okay.
So I had been in for a pretty long while, although I was the youngest of the team leaders. So we were an older group, very experienced. And like you mentioned, I was kind of given the ability to, within reason, pick the folks that I wanted. So I had, what I considered a real dream team of guys that I admired. And so we trained up for a while, went to Iraq, and we worked basically underneath the Navy SEAL headquarters. So we were referred to as Task Unit Raider, which was kind of harkens back to the Marine Raiders of World War II that were the Marine Corps and the nation's first special operations force. So it was really cool to be a part of that lineage. And then based on the success of our deployment to Iraq, the decision was made that we would create a component of the United States Special Operations Command called the Marine Special Operations Command. So, and that's where I continue to work. I left the Marine Corps, left active duty in 2008, and immediately came back to work in civilian clothes and as their training and education director. So I've worked at the school that trains Marine Raiders.
Okay.
Now, and so it's been really cool to be able to be there from the beginning and kind of watch as things have progressed and still be able to have some hand in the development of the Raider of today.
That's amazing. Yeah. I'm sure it's quite an exceptional group of men and women who are doing that.
Yes, yeah, it is. And the book really largely, there's some, it goes back a little bit to my childhood and bounces around a bit, but largely covers that kind of 3-year window for the most part that we were started, from 9/11 really through our deployment to Iraq, and then a little bit of the startup of the larger organization.
Now, let's talk about writing. You when you got out of active service, you went back and got a master's in creative writing, and I wonder what was the pull toward being a writer.
I thought a lot about this, and I've answered this question a lot lately and to various podcasts and interviews and things for the book. My father instilled in me this love of reading at a really young age. I mean, he had this, what I thought was a huge library, and from the Hardy Boys and just Westerns, classics, he would read them to me until I was old enough to read. So, and almost as soon as I started reading and learned to write, I was like, hey, I want to write my own stories. That was not really fostered in the Marine Corps. The Marine Corps doesn't necessarily foster a lot of creativity. So I kind of put that aside when I joined the Marine Corps. But when I got out, I had the GI Bill and the opportunity to use that for schooling. So I got a master's degree in liberal studies, which really wound up. I mean, almost all of the classes that I took were either literature classes or religion, some sort of comparative religion classes, because those were kind of the two things that fascinated me. And as a process of taking these literature classes, we had to do a lot of writing. And, one of the professors just kind of really encouraged me to write. And the first, experience that I wrote about was the experience that I mentioned, the youngish man in Iraq that I shot with a sniper rifle. And it was turned into an essay called Death Letter. And I really thought when I wrote that this is important. It's important to me, but I think it's important. So I submitted it over the span of several years. I must have submitted it to 20 different publications and was rejected, summarily by each of them. But eventually it was published, and that really kind of was what ultimately led to the book. So it's, but yeah, I think there's immense value for anyone, but I think especially for veterans to kind of write their stories down. If nothing else, it makes you reflect on it. Kind of go back and relive it, get it out of your head and onto paper. So there's absolute value in that, and so I and Worth do some things where we work with veteran writers to encourage that.
Yeah. Now I did read that Death Letter, and I guess you must have moved it to a different spot, because the initial link that Worth sent me a few months ago didn't work anymore. So maybe you've moved it to one of your Substacks or something like that, or maybe it's in the book, and so you got to keep it.
It's
it's private till then.
It parts of it. I mean, it's split up and it's a little bit different, but it's certainly in the book. I think I had my son make a better website for me, and in that, I think got lost from the web.
Gotcha. Okay.
That essay.
Another reason to buy the book.
Exactly.
I mean, such a tradition of, and Worth and I've actually talked about this quite a bit, but I took a class in, I mean, it's so funny, John, because in the fall of 1986, I guess you're probably a year behind me in high school. I graduated in spring of 86. So fall of 86, you're a year away from joining the Marine Corps, and I'm at a bougie Ivy League university, sitting in a writing class that changed my life. And it was called The Iliad and Memories of War. And we started with the Iliad, and we worked our way through war literature up through Vietnam. Up through, I think the last book we read was Michael Herr's Dispatches, but we read Xenophon's Anabasis, and we read Red Badge of Courage, and we read it was incredible. And I think that was the first time it dawned on me that that I had missed something by not seeing combat and knowing that I never would see combat, that there was something that forged these writers that I had missed out on. And I've been fascinated by war literature ever since and have devoured it and read several, either memoirs or novels every year. And then of course watch all the movies, all the war movies. But I mean, you're entering into a long and illustrious line of correspondents who have written about their experience in battle. And I wonder, is that intimidating? What's that like to write into that genre?
Yes. I mean, you really can't spend a lot of time thinking about it or yeah, it would be absolutely daunting. One of the kind of war books that really impacted me, and not the first time I read it, but when I went back, and it's funny because Worth shares a similar thoughts with Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried.
Yeah.
That has kind of always been the benchmark as a Vietnam memoir, or it's a fictional.
Yeah, he calls it a novel, but right, yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've always been fascinated by with memoir when writers write their what's the definition of truth that you use. And Tim O'Brien says, hey, I'm writing this and calling it fiction because sometimes fiction is truer than the truth.
Yeah.
And I talk about that a little bit in in my book because in the Marine Corps especially, we're not slaves to the truth, right? The Marine Corps history is taught to us as gospel, right? And it's crafted to kind of push us forward in times when other people would run backward. So there's certainly there's things that I say in the book that I'm saying are true, regarding our history that you have to look at it kind of through that lens, that this is the truest way that I can tell you the thing that I learned. It's sometimes what Tim O'Brien calls happening truth is,
yes,
less true than, or more true than truth, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what was the process then of writing the book under those, in that same, crowd of incredible authors and writers who are doing it? Obviously, as you say, you can't think about it too much, but you must have known, that's the kind, that's the way. I mean, to go from the profound to the profane. I mean, that's the way your book's going to be marketed. That's how it's going to be classified on Amazon and in bookstores and things like that.
Yes. I like I said, I couldn't spend a lot of time thinking about that or allowing the weight of that to press down on me, as it went, or I probably would have never, gotten anything on paper. I put myself under a deadline that was kind of, somewhat self-imposed and somewhat contractually, composed by the publisher, and really just focused on a chapter at a time, and with the intent, I think, of trying to write something that's the trouble that I have with a lot of global war on terror era, memoir that I've read. And it's not trouble, not in a negative way so much, but a lot of them were written very, very shortly, after the incidents that they're writing about, without, some time. And that's, what memoir mean, right? Memory, right? So some time for it to breathe and some consideration. And, a lot of them are very, I feel, pointed towards a military audience. And, being a guy with an MFA, whatever that means, I kind of felt some obligation to certainly be reflective and to try to write, for a civilian audience, to write in a way that's understandable, a way that, is not full of bragging or, it's like, hey, here's what happened. Here's what it meant to me. Here's what I thought about it at the time. And here's how I kind of reflect on it now. And kind of keeping that idea of they always tell you as a writer to keep an ideal reader in mind. And,
yes.
I try to keep the idea of, hey, I'm trying to write this for someone who is, never been in the military, but is interested and, kind of wants to understand what the experience was like, what the people involved in it are like, the toll that it takes and those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So I hope I was, and I figured if I did that, I'd still tell some, because like you said, it was, in many ways, it was kind of pulled right out of a Hollywood script, this idea. So, so there's excitement certainly in it. There's all sorts of things in it. So I figured that would kind of guarantee the military audience, but if I can get, target it towards the civilian audience, it's, just is curious. And I think, like you mentioned, there's just so few people today have served or from families where that's, prevalent. So I think there's a lot of people that are just curious and want to know what it was all about. So that's my attempt to shed a little light on things.
Yeah. And I'm guessing it had to be vetted by the Marine Corps.
It did. And that was 6 months from, from the time I sent it. And it came back with, black marks, redacted things that I had to remove or change. Not a lot, but there was some. So they were all, things that I could easily, talk around or so I don't think I lost, a lot in that, other than, of course, 6 months. The book would be out, probably out by now had I not had that delay.
Yeah. Well, with any luck, some movie producer will read your book, and we'll see it on the big screen. But yeah, I'm excited for you. I know the feeling. I've got a book coming out in a month and a half. So it's that you and I are both in that kind of no man's land of we'll call it, for the sake of this podcast, a demilitarized zone, where you kind of don't know where you stand until the book comes out in the world, and then you find out if it's to rapturous applause or crickets. you just don't know.
Yeah, and I have 6 months still to wait, so it won't be out until August.
Yeah.
It's available for pre-sale now.
Oh, but, I know.
Won't be out until the 13th of August.
All right. Well, I hope you have a good summer and you can, rest easy knowing that it's done and it can come out and it will be what it will be,
Indeed.
Writers, we just have to put our stuff out in the world and let's see where it flows in the universe. That's kind of that's what I've found after, I don't know, 14 or 15 books. So
yeah, it's a pretty big act of faith. But if you're going to write, then that's part of the bargain.
Yeah, you got that right. Well, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. It's great to meet you over the internet, and I hope that we can meet in person sometime. Worth seems to make those kind of things happen too. And if I get down there, we might be able to. Maybe we'll see if we can't get a shotgun in your hand and go chase some ducks or quail or something like that.
That sounds good.
All right. Well, thanks for your time.
Thank you. Thank you very much.